Charlotte and her guards trudged on through the secret forest. She looked from side to side, trying to assess the chances of escape. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a bush move, and Thaddeus suddenly popped his head up. Charlotte gasped. The guard looked at her suspiciously, but Charlotte gave him an innocent smile. A high-pitched laugh made her spin round.
So nice to see the award-winning journalist!
Block walked towards her, a cruel smile on his face.
Tell your gorillas to take the handcuffs off me, demanded Charlotte. You are completely in the master's power. You can't dictate to us.
Suddenly, a movement in the bushes caught his attention, and Block stepped off the path to investigate. Charlotte had to think fast. If she couldn't manage to distract him, he'd discover Thaddeus.
Hey, did I still call you Twitchy? She called.
Block stopped dead in his tracks.
What did you call me?
He squawked. Charlotte grinned. She had him now.
The nickname the papers gave you during the trial.
Block's eyes blinked uncontrollably, and his neck stiffened.
No one calls me that. Understand?
Charlotte laughed.
You mean none of these guards ever call you Twitchy? I'll bet they want to.
Block turned to the commander and screamed hysterically.
Gag her if she says that word again. Now, get moving.
Warily, avoiding the cameras, the children made their way down the forest track. Shh! A guard! Jack put a finger to his lips, and they all sank back into the undergrowth. Peggy's fingers grazed against something cold and hard, jutting up out of the ground. As soon as the guard was out of sight, she beckoned to the others to come and look. Brushing aside the leaves, they could see an opening about 1 metre square, covered by a metal grill. "It's a well or shaft of some kind," whispered Peggy, lifting the grill. "It only goes down about 2 metres, then it seems to turn at a right angle," said Paul. "Of course!" exclaimed Jack. "It's a ventilation shaft. The thugs must have their headquarters underground. I'll bet they have Laura down there." "There's a ladder going down the side of it," said Peggy. "Let's go down and look for her." The children clambered into the shaft and pulled down the grill. Prince gave a low whine. Peggy's voice floated up to him. "You can't go down a ladder, Prince. Stay where you are. We'll be back soon." Prince slumped down despondently beside the grill. Thaddeus cautiously approached the camouflaged entrance to Monk's base. A few moments before, he'd seen Block and the guards march Charlotte through its steel door, making it open by sliding a card through a box in the wall. He took out the card he'd found in the guard's wallet back at the warehouse in England and swiped the card through the security panel. Yes, that was it. The door slid open. Thaddeus slipped through the entrance and started to run down the passage. The 3 children climbed to the bottom of the ladder. Passing a whirring extractor fan, they crawled along the next section of the ventilation shaft. Jack held up his hand. "Listen! Voices!" he said. The children inched forward to peer through a square grill. Pacing to and fro in the room below was a long-haired man in a white suit. Glaring at a wall of blank video monitors, he shouted at a guard sitting at a computer keyboard.
"Try Sector 5! Get out there and fix those cameras!"
Laura was tied to a chair by the table facing the ventilation grill. Looking into the room, the 3 children sighed with relief. At last they'd found her. Block was inching his way into the room, cringing before his master. Monk pushed him against the wall.
"You idiot, Block! 3 children and a dog! You let them escape!"
"They're too clever for you!" cried Laura.
"Silence!"
he roared, giving Laura's chair a vicious kick. "Don't shout at me, you horrible man!" she yelled back. Block whined for forgiveness.
"We'll find them, Master. I'm truly sorry."
Monk's anger subsided.
"Where's the prisoner?" he asked.
"The Clancy woman's being held, Master, in the Venom sector," While Block was stammering out the details of Charlotte's capture, Jack scratched lightly against the grill and whispered, "Laura!" She spied Jack's outline behind the grill, and her eyes lit up. Then Monk barked out an order.
"Bring the girl, Block, and follow me."
Block untied Laura, yanked her out of the chair, and dragged her along behind Monk. Laura gave Jack a despairing look as the electronic door closed behind her. Jack pushed open the grill, jumped onto a filing cabinet, and from there sprang to the floor. Paul and Peggy followed, shutting the grill quietly behind them. Peggy looked at the clutter of boxes and equipment on the table. A security card emblazoned with a spider emblem caught her eye. "I think they used a card like this to open the door," she said quietly. They crept to the door and peered through its glass panel. "All clear," whispered Jack. Peggy swiped the card through the security panel, and it worked. The door opened and they hurried out into the corridor. Back at the lodge, Frau Bauble bustled into the boy's bedroom with a broom and spotted Mike in the bed.
"You asleep, little potato?"
she asked, feeling his forehead. It was ice cold. Ruby appeared in the doorway, yawning and stretching.
"Morning, Frau Bauble."
She noticed the look of concern on the housekeeper's face and hurried to Mike's bedside. "What's wrong, Mike? Wake up!" Ruby felt his brow. "You're freezing!" Mike pushed her hand away. "I'm boiling." "I'll call the doctor. It looks serious," said Ruby.
"No, doctor, the Bertiwurst," cried Frau Bauble.
Ruby stared at her.
"The Bertiwurst will cure the little potato. It cures everything," she cried gaily. "It is a medicine from wild mountain flowers. I pick some now."
Ruby plumped up Mike's pillows, then ran downstairs to find Barney. She heard him talking as she burst into the living room.
"Yeah, I'll do it immediately."
Barney put down the phone. "Was that the Royal Guard?" Ruby asked eagerly.
No, it was, well,
Nothing," Barney stammered. "Listen, Barney, where are the Royal Guard?"
"They're here. They're setting up a command post in the barn. I'll take you there,"
said Barney, leading her onto the porch and towards the barn.
"Well, where are they?" Ruby asked. Searching the grounds. The commander's using the barn as an office. After you," said Barney, letting her go first.
Ruby stepped inside and looked around. "Is this a joke, Barney?" she asked. The only thing in the barn was a cream-coloured nanny goat.
"I'm afraid not,"
Barney answered, slipping a rope over her shoulders and pinning her arms to her sides.
"What's going on?" shouted Ruby. "Don't struggle. You'll only make it harder for both of us," said Barney miserably. "So you're in on this too?" Ruby cried furiously.
Barney picked her up and plonked her down on a bale of straw. He tied another rope round her ankles and fastened a piece of fabric across her mouth.
"I'm truly sorry, Ruby."
He left the barn, bolting the door behind him. As Barney trudged back to the lodge, his mobile phone rang.
"Hello? Not yet. I was just about to,"
he muttered into the receiver.
"Yes, I understand the penalty for failure."
He flicked the phone off, went into the lodge and fetched his knapsack. Frowning thoughtfully, he drew out a small glass box. He stared at the venomous spider inside it and began to sweat.
"I don't want to do this to you, Ruby, but I have no choice."
Ruby's calls for help were heard by no one but the goat, who nuzzled her hands and began nibbling at the rope round her wrists. Ruby chuckled to herself as the goat chewed away happily.
"Rescued by a goat," she thought. "No one will ever believe it."
At last she could flex her arms, and soon she felt the rope give way entirely. She wrenched the gag from her mouth and sighed with relief. "Oh, thanks, pal," she said, scratching the goat under the chin. She spotted a saw hanging on a nail, pulled herself up and jumped towards it. Then she hacked at the bonds round her ankles until she was free. Looking about the barn, she noticed a magnificent old motorbike and next to it a dusty helmet and a pair of goggles. She pulled them on and wheeled the motorbike into the centre of the barn. Barney plodded back towards the barn with a heavy heart. As he reached the door, he held up the glass box and stared at the poisonous spider. No, he couldn't do it. Lifting the lid, he gently tipped the spider onto a rock. "Goodbye, pal. You're gonna love the great outdoors." An engine roared inside the barn. Barney flung open the barn door. "No, Ruby!" he screamed as Ruby thundered past him on the motorbike. Barney ran after her, yelling, "Ruby, come back! I wasn't gonna hurt you, honestly!" In the venom sector of his secret laboratories, Monk cradled a large glass case containing several spiders.
"We meet again, Charlotte Clancy," he said. "How does it feel to be on the receiving end for once?"
He snorted with amusement.
"Cut the cackle, Clovis. Why have you kidnapped me?"
Charlotte folded her arms defiantly. Monk pulled a small glass vial containing a pale green liquid from his pocket.
"This is a very special spider poison. It induces paralysis, followed by death in
48 hours, Charlotte finished the sentence. Monk sneered.
"But this poison is different. This spider produces its own antidote."
He pulled out an identical vial from his other pocket.
"All I need now is a final test."
Charlotte had to get hold of the antidote in Monk's hands. Thaddeus needed it. Forcing herself to sound calm, she asked, "Why is this poison different?"
"If you take it, you become both alive and dead at the same time. No breathing, no heartbeat, but still alive. For years, if necessary."
Monk put the files down on the table.
"But why?"
persisted Charlotte.
"Allow me."
He tapped into his computer, bringing a map of Baronia onto the screen.
"You see the forest river? When my little concoction comes into contact with water, it copies itself. I need only put 1 litre in that river, and it will spread across the entire world."
"You'll end up with millions of living dead. What good will that be to you?" Charlotte asked, horrified.
"Only I shall have the power to reactivate them. I will rule the world, and you, my dear, shall be the first."
Monk spoke into the intercom.
"Bring in our other visitor, Block."
The door opened, and Block pushed Laura into the room.
"Laura, what are you doing here?"
gasped Charlotte. She ran over to Laura and hugged her tightly.
"Tie them up, Block," thundered Monk. "Then come to me at the pod. It's time."
He swept out. Block and the guard tied each of their prisoners to a chair and hurried after Monk. As soon as they'd gone, Charlotte shuffled her chair over to the table, picked up the 2 files that Monk had left, and stuffed them into her pocket. "Are the other children here?" she asked. Laura nodded. "Yes, but Monk doesn't know." "We'll have to find them," sighed Charlotte. "And your dad, too." "Dad? Is he here?" Laura asked, astonished. "He is, but I can't explain now. Let's concentrate on trying to escape." Charlotte stretched her hands towards an empty glass flask, grasped it and smashed it against the table. The base splintered and showered around her feet. She scrunched her chair back to Laura and began sawing at the rope round her wrists with the broken edge of the flask. Thaddeus, fighting dizziness, staggered down the corridor, searching for Charlotte. He reached a door and swiped his stolen security card through the panel. As the door opened, Thaddeus stumbled in. A hospital theatre trolley stood against the wall, draped in a green sheet. A cylinder marked anaesthetic was attached to one end, with some face masks draped across its nozzle. Thaddeus's vision began to blur. At the sound of approaching voices, he quietly crawled up onto the lower shelf of the trolley and pulled the sheet back into place. The door slid open.
"She'll require 5 litres of life suspension gas,"
said Block as he scurried along beside Clovis Monk.
"Excellent. Go and get the woman." "Yes, master."
Block summoned 2 guards.
"Bring that trolley and follow me," he commanded.
Thaddeus was vaguely aware of a swaying sensation as his trolley was wheeled away. Then he drifted into unconsciousness. Charlotte and Laura had just finished sawing through their ropes with the broken glass when Block came in, bringing 2 guards and the trolley. He frowned angrily as he saw the 2 prisoners untied.
Not your day, is it, Clancy?
Block grabbed her and pressed a mask over her face. There was a loud hiss as anaesthetic flowed into the connecting tube. Charlotte's body slowly drooped and fell into Block's arms.
No!
Cried Laura, punching Block as he loaded Charlotte on top of the trolley. He shoved Laura aside and summoned a guard.
Tie that pest up again, he ordered.
Then he wheeled the trolley containing Charlotte and the hidden Thaddeus into the corridor. Jack peered round a corner, then quickly pulled back against the wall. "I must be going mad," he whispered to Peggy and Paul. "I'm sure I saw Charlotte being wheeled off in a hospital trolley." "That's impossible," said Peggy. "She's on tour with Dad." "I'm positive it was her," Jack insisted. "Let's have a look in the room the trolley came out of." They hurried down the corridor and found Laura in the room, tied to the chair. "Are you all right, Laura?" Jack bent down to untie her. "Yes, but they've got Charlotte. They've kidnapped her." She wriggled her hands free and stood up. Her right wrist was bleeding a little. Laura picked up Monk's handkerchief from the table and tied it round her wrist. "Dad's here too," she said. "He was following Charlotte and her kidnappers, but then he disappeared." "What on earth's going on, Laura?" asked Jack. "The man in the white suit, that's Clovis Monk. He's made a poison and he's going to give it to Charlotte. We've got to rescue her." "Look at this!" Peggy was tapping away at Monk's computer, trying to discover more information about his underground setup. The children watched as a succession of photographs flashed across the screen. "Those are agents in Monk's organization," said Peggy. "There's at least one from every country. Let's see who the agent is for Baronia." "Oh, no!" cried Laura, as a familiar face appeared. "Barney!" exclaimed Paul. "I thought there was something fishy about him." "Forget about it," cried Jack. "Our first priority is to find Charlotte and Dad. Come on!" As the children slipped out of the room, they noticed a glass window in the wall opposite. Ducking down, they crept over to it and peered over the ledge, and gasped. Assisted by guards, Monk was supervising the transfer of Charlotte's limp body from the hospital trolley into a pod-like container.
"Now, before we administer the poison,"
he pressed a button and the glass lid of the capsule closed over Charlotte.
"Load the life-preserving gas," he commanded.
Block turned a switch and slowly the pod began to fill with a white mist. Monk checked a monitoring unit.
"Good. Keep the temperature constant. We don't want our first specimen to perish."
His eyes glowed with madness.
"He's so horrible," whispered Laura. "We must do something. Oh no, he's seen us! Run!" "Seize them!" screamed Monk. "Don't let them get away!"
Block and several guards ran off in pursuit. Monk shouted at 2 of the guards.
"You stay here and watch the woman. Keep the temperature at a steady 40 degrees.
Thaddeus awakened slowly into what seemed to be a green tent. Then he remembered where he was. He eased aside a flap of the sheet and peered out. 2 men in camouflage gear were standing with their backs to him. Thaddeus stretched up to reach the 2 anesthetic masks that were dangling from the trolley handle, then climbed slowly down from the trolley shelf. He crept over to the guards, jumped up, clamped a mask over each of their faces, and blasted them with sleeping gas. They slumped unconscious to the floor. Thaddeus saw Charlotte lying in the pod and in a panic began tearing at the lid. He couldn't open it. Then he was overcome by dizziness again and collapsed into unconsciousness. The temperature gauge on the pod flashed a warning. Temperature above acceptable level. Danger! Ruby was speeding along on the old motorbike. Suddenly, a jeep screeched to a stop in front of her, blocking her route. She skidded to a halt. A guard got out of the jeep and strode towards her. "Look, I don't know what you want, but you've got the wrong person here," Ruby protested. "I'm just on holiday." She flipped her leg over the bike and backed away. The guard raised his truncheon aggressively. Suddenly, something hurtled past her and struck the guard squarely on the head. He dropped to the ground, unconscious. Ruby grabbed his truncheon as it rolled away and spun round. "Barney!" "I ran after you, Ruby, because I have to talk to you." Ruby held the truncheon in front of her. "Don't you come near me, you obnoxious cowboy!" "Oh, Ruby," he pleaded, "I'm sorry. I didn't want to do it. But a few years ago, when I was a government agent, I sold some secrets to a guy named Clovis Monk, and—" Barney swallowed with embarrassment. "He's been blackmailing me ever since." "You've been working with him all along, huh?" said Ruby scathingly. "Yeah, but it was easy. The king wanted me to keep the kids safe, and Monk wanted to keep people away from the cave. By doing one job, I could do the other and satisfy both parties. But it all went wrong when Laura disappeared." "So you never called the Royal Guard to search for her?" asked Ruby. Barney nodded. "I disconnected the phones too, so no one could check. I thought it would all blow over." "What about tying me up like a trussed chicken?" He gave her an apologetic smile. "They wanted me to kill you with a poisonous spider." "Charming!" exclaimed Ruby. "But I couldn't do it," Barney said quickly. "I've been foolish and cowardly, but no matter what they do to me, I would never hurt you. And that's the truth." Barney's mobile phone started ringing. It was lying where it had fallen after Barney had thrown it at the guard. Ruby scooped it up and tossed it over to him. "Hello?" said Barney uncertainly. "No, I haven't." He grew bolder. "And I don't intend to. Your days are numbered, Monk. I'm off to get the Royal Guard." He flung the phone into the depths of the forest. "Well, that was bright," sighed Ruby. "We could have used it to phone the king and saved ourselves a journey." Barney looked mortified, but Ruby only shrugged her shoulders and tossed the truncheon away. She clambered onto the motorbike and said, "Hop on, mister." In the venom sector, slumped beside the pod, Thaddeus opened his eyes and sat up shakily. The bodies of the guards he'd anaesthetized lay next to him. Thaddeus looked puzzled, and then memory flooded back. Charlotte was in danger. He pulled himself up to the pod. Steam was pouring into the capsule and leaking into the room. The danger sign flashed continuously. There was no time to waste. The control panel of the capsule had so many buttons and switches. Hurriedly, he pressed each one until finally the lid of the pod slid open, releasing a great cloud of steam. Narrowing his eyes and holding his breath, Thaddeus leant into the capsule, dragged out Charlotte's body and placed her gently on the floor. He turned to the two unconscious guards and began pulling off their uniforms. Thaddeus dressed Charlotte in the camouflage gear of one of the guards and pulled a balaclava over her head. He pulled on a matching outfit himself, hauled Charlotte up and dragged her out of the room. It took enormous effort to carry Charlotte through the long tunnels, but at last Thaddeus staggered up the stairs to the exit. A guard stepped forward, barring his way. Thaddeus thought fast. "Get down there quick! There's an emergency!" he yelled. The guard jumped to attention, then rushed down the steps. Thaddeus sighed with relief as he fished in his pockets for the security card. When the door slid open, he heaved Charlotte over his shoulder and unsteadily carried her towards an overgrown trail through the forest. Gently, he laid Charlotte on the ground and took off her balaclava. "Charlie," he begged, rubbing her cold hands. "Charlie, please wake up." Monk burst into the venom sector, his eyes blazing. He kicked at the bodies of the two guards who were slumped on the floor, dressed only in their underwear and socks. The pod which had contained Charlotte was empty. Block followed Monk into the room, shaking with fear. "Master!" "The woman! Find her!" Monk shouted. "But, Master, I think you should know. The little girl called Laura is missing." His face twitched nervously.
And we can't find the other children.
What?
Monk shrieked in fury.
We've searched everywhere. They're not here.
You idiot! You let a bunch of kids outwit you!
Monk slammed his fist down on the pod. Suddenly, he looked up at the ventilation grill.
There's only one way they could have got out. Block! You know what to do!
The children were racing down a corridor, hotly pursued by guards. "They're catching up!" yelled Paul. They skidded round a corner and practically fell over Prince, who'd been tearing down the corridor towards them. The dog barked happily, then bounded back the way he'd come, turning constantly to make sure they were following. "What's he doing here?" cried Laura. "I don't know," answered Jack, "but let's follow him. We've nothing to lose." After winding his way confidently through several tunnels, the dog led them straight to a ventilation shaft. They scrambled along it as fast as they could. Suddenly, Paul stopped. "What's that weird smell?" he asked. Wisps of pink smoke began to waft about them. They started to cough as the smoke grew more dense. "It stings!" cried Peggy, rubbing her eyes. Jack's eyes closed. They all felt an overwhelming desire to sleep.
"Prince, get help! Fetch Ruby! Fetch Dad!"
cried Laura. One by one, each of the children slumped unconscious as Prince scrambled along to an exit and burst out into the sunlit forest. Charlotte pressed a hand against her thumping head and opened her eyes. She hitched herself up from the ground and stared in surprise at the camouflage uniform she was wearing. Then she spotted Thaddeus lying on the ground, out cold. She lifted her camouflage jacket, reached into her pocket, and pulled out the 2 glass vials she'd taken from Monk's lab. Which was the poison and which the antidote? She had to take a risk. There was no choice. She lifted Thaddeus's head and put one of the vials to his mouth. To her enormous relief, he opened his eyes within seconds. "You okay, Thed?" she asked. He frowned. "I don't know. I have a terrible taste in my mouth." "Well, you should watch what you drink, especially spider antidotes." She held up the 2 empty vials. "Meat poison and antidote." "How did you know which one to give me?" Thaddeus asked, rising unsteadily to his feet. "I didn't. I gave you both. I figured the antidote would cancel out the poison either way," she said. "Brilliant, Sherlock," he laughed. "Come on, let's get out of here." Charlotte caught his arm. "Thed, there's something you should know. The children are in Monk's headquarters." Thaddeus stopped dead in his tracks. "What? If that lunatic has harmed a hair on their heads, I'll—" He strode off through the trees. Charlotte ran after him. "Calm down, Thed," she called, trying to catch her breath. "Look, if we get caught—" Thaddeus held up his hand. "Someone's coming." They dived behind a tree. To their astonishment, Prince bounded up to them, barking joyfully. Thaddeus bent down and gave him a hearty rub. He held the dog's face in his hands and looked him in the eye. "Prince, do you know where the children are? Laura?" Prince barked sharply. "He does. Prince, seek Laura." Thaddeus and Charlotte raced after the dog as he scurried away through the undergrowth. Ruby roared into the city on the old motorbike, with Barney clutching her round the waist and hanging on for dear life. When they reached the palace, they abandoned the bike and rushed up the steps to the grand entrance, pushing aside the astonished sentries. The king stood up as they burst into his throne room. "What is the meaning of this outrage?" he demanded. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," Ruby gasped, "but this can't wait. The children are missing in the secret forest." The king looked startled. "What?" "It's true, sir," said Barney. "An evil man's at work in the secret forest. You'd better send in the royal guard before it's too late." In his laboratory, Monk faced the children. "You've done well to evade me. You'll be worthy citizens of the era of Clovis Monk, master of the world."
He walked over to his glass display cases on the table, crooning at the hundreds of spiders crawling about inside them.
Soon, my pets, the guards will release your poison into the rivers, and the whole world will be paralyzed. Most people will perish, but a few who've proved their worthiness I shall allow to live.
You're mad, cried Peggy. It'll never work.
You think not? See for yourself.
He lifted a case. No! Shrieked Peggy. She took a deep breath and screamed so shrilly that at times it seemed almost inaudible.
Silence!
Roared Monk, protectively encircling the cases with his arms. The guards stood rooted to the spot, hands clamped over their ears. Laura took a huge lungful of air and began screaming too.
Stop it! Cried Monk.
The girls increased the pitch and intensity until the sound was almost unbearable. Under the pressure of the high-pitched sound waves, the glass cases quivered and the spiders jumped and shuddered inside them. Still screaming, the girls backed towards the safety of the door, followed by Jack and Paul. They screamed one final deafening note. Every glass case in the room exploded. Spiders and shards of glass catapulted into the air and rained down in a hailstorm on Monk and his guards. "Let's go!" cried Jack. The children dashed out the door and hurried down the corridor. "A dead end!" cried Peggy as they halted outside a storeroom. Heavy feet pounded along behind them. "The security card," said Jack. Peggy flicked it through the control panel. Yes! The door slid open and they tumbled in. "Right, barricade, everyone!" yelled Jack. The children heaved a large table and a filing cabinet against the door. But one of the guards was soon attacking the door with a sledgehammer. Then they heard Monk's voice.
"Resistance is futile! Give up now!"
"They haven't got us yet," said Jack, sounding more confident than he felt. Looking miserable, Laura plonked herself against a pile of blue cylinders. Peggy stared at them. "And they won't get us," she cried. Moving Laura aside, she pointed to the cylinders. In bold lettering, they were marked Anesthetic. Various masks lined the shelf above them. "Get it?" said Peggy. The others nodded excitedly. Another sledgehammer blow slammed into the metal.
"Open this door!"
ordered Monk. "Right, we'll let you in," called Peggy. They hauled back the furniture and Peggy swished the door open. The room was pitch black and silent.
"What pathetic little game is this?"
cried Monk. He pushed Block and the guards in before him and flicked the light switch. "Now!" cried Paul. Peggy swished the door shut. Wearing gas masks, the children opened the taps on the cylinders of anesthetic. The air in the room became dense with red smoke. The guards coughed and wheezed, then fell to the floor in an unconscious heap. Suddenly, someone started pounding on the door. "Open up! It's Dad! Charlotte's here too!" Peggy swiped her card and the door slid open. Pulling off their gas masks, they stumbled out to greet Thaddeus and Charlotte. Prince rushed about wildly. "Hey, where's Mike?" asked Thaddeus. "He wasn't well, so he stayed at the lodge," explained Laura. She dug her hands into her pockets and, to her surprise, pulled out Monk's handkerchief that she had tied round her wrist when it was bleeding. Thinking of Monk, she gasped and cried out, "Monk wasn't there!" "Not where?" asked Thaddeus. "In the heap of people who passed out in the storeroom. I'm sure he wasn't there." "You're right," said Paul. "I'll bet he escaped through a ventilation shaft." "He'll have gone to the river," cried Laura. "He said he was going to poison the world from there." "What are we waiting for? Come on," urged Thaddeus, breaking into a run. When they reached the exit, Laura pressed the handkerchief to Prince's nose. "Seek, Prince! Seek Monk!" The dog snuffled about and then gave a sharp yap. "He's picked up the scent! Good dog, Prince!" said Thaddeus, and they all hurried into the forest after him. "There he is!" cried Peggy. Monk, still suffering from the after-effects of the anesthetic, was staggering towards the river.
They rapidly caught up with him and positioned themselves between him and the rushing water.
"Don't be a fool, Monk. It's all over," said Thaddeus.
Get back!
Monk held out a glass tube filled with a pale green liquid.
It's all over for you, he shrieked. Let the new era begin!
He hurled the tube high above the river. They all watched, speechless, as it curved over their heads. It seemed to spin through the air in slow motion. There was no way to stop it. The world was doomed. Then Prince launched himself into the air at lightning speed and caught the tube deftly in his jaws. Fountains of water erupted above him as he sank from sight. Everyone stood frozen to the spot. Suddenly, Prince emerged, shaking water off his long hair, and in his mouth was the tube, still intact. "Brilliant!" the 4 children chorused. Monk sank to the ground in agony. A while later, they set off for Killimooin Lodge.
"It's a good thing the Royal Guard finally turned up," said Thaddeus. "Monk and Block won't get out of the King's dungeon in a hurry."
Ruby smiled. "I'm glad the King is going to pardon Barney. He isn't a bad man, just misguided." "What an adventure," sighed Peggy. "And poor old Mike missed it all." "What's wrong with him anyway?" asked Charlotte. "He felt dizzy and sick," said Peggy. Thaddeus stopped in his tracks. "What? Have you seen any spiders round here, Ruby?" Charlotte asked urgently. "Yes, a huge one up in my bedroom." Thaddeus and Charlotte sprinted to the lodge and rushed up into Mike's bedroom. He was lying quite still, his eyes closed. Charlotte pointed to his ankle, which had the clear puncture marks of a Malakut devil spider. The colour drained from Thaddeus's face. "Do you have the antidote?" he demanded. Charlotte shook her head. "I gave it all to you, Thad." "Dad, what's wrong?" cried Peggy, as she and the others appeared in the doorway. Before he could answer, Frau Bauble bustled in past them.
"Hello, how's my little potato?" she clucked.
"Call the hospital!" shouted Charlotte.
"What's up?"
said Mike sleepily. "Who's ill?" Thaddeus and Charlotte swung round in astonishment. Mike was sitting up, looking very perky, as if he had just woken from a refreshing sleep. "How do you feel?" asked Thaddeus. Mike grinned. "Great!" Thaddeus couldn't believe it. "But how?"
"It's the Bertieverse," explained Frau Bauble, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world.
"The, what?" stammered Thaddeus. Prince Paul explained. "Bertieverse, the Baronian magic potion." Mike grimaced. "It tastes worse than Ruby's soup, Dad."
"Hey, that's enough," said Ruby, laughing.
Frau Bauble clapped her hands together proudly.
"Maybe so, but it cures everything, even the spider bites, my little potato."